In this video, you'll find out what you need to consider when changing your brake disc on your bike and how to choose a suitable disc. First of all, when do I need to change the disc? Each manufacturer has different specifications as to the thickness at which your disc should be changed. For Shimano, for example, this is usually 1.5 mm. For Magura, 1.8 mm. But if in doubt, please do some research for your disc. The minimum thickness is often stated on the brake disc itself. Of course, you can also change the disc for other reasons. Because it is too small for you, the disc has been damaged in some way, for visual reasons, because it tends to make noise, it is bent, or so on. The easiest way to measure the thickness of the disc is with a standard caliper gauge. You only have to pay attention to two different points: the mounting standard, Centerlock or 6-bolt standard, and the brake disc diameter, 160, 180, 203 mm or similar. A small third point: two-piece discs are not always compatible with every brake system. We have also made a little extra video for Hope discs. You are welcome to watch it. As a rule, you don't necessarily have to pay attention to the thickness of the disc. There are also some exceptions here, but the automatic pad adjustment of your brake usually compensates for the tenths of them between the different discs. If not, you may have bled without a bleed block, in which case you may have to bleed again, and then please always use a bleed block. Nevertheless, we recommend staying with the thickness of the original disc to prevent problems with the pressure point and grinding. Replacing the discs is fairly simple and can be done by anyone, provided they have the right tools, which is nothing special. You need standard tools, which you usually have at home if you occasionally tinker with your bike. For 6-bolt, this is usually a Torx T25, which everyone should have at home, preferably with a Torx spanner, of course. For the Centerlock lock ring, either a cassette puller for internal gearing or a bottom bracket spanner for Hollowtech for external gearing. Unfortunately, not all cassette pullers and bottom bracket spanners fit all hubs. In any case, there must be a recess in the bottom bracket spanner, and this must be large enough for the end cap of the hub so that the tool grips the lock ring properly and is not obstructed by the end cap. Unfortunately, you cannot fit the lock ring with such a nut. There is also a small restriction when choosing the locking ring. As a rule, you can use a lock ring with internal teeth for quick releases and through axles up to and including 12 mm. With 15 or 20 mm, you usually need an external toothing, otherwise the hub shell will be in the way. With the 6-bolt standard, the disc is attached directly to the hub with 6 bolts. With the Centerlock standard, the disc sits positively on the toothing of the hub shell and is clamped by a locking ring. The diameter can usually be found on the old disc, but if it is really no longer legible, you can also measure the disc with a folding rule or similar. As a rule, them is not important, as there are only a few common dimensions, such as 160, 180, 203 mm. But in individual cases, there are unfortunately also exceptions, such as 183, 185 mm, which is often the case with Avid, for example. You should really choose the right diameter for perfect braking performance. Otherwise, the friction surface of the disc may not run 100% through the pads or may not even fit through the brake caliper and rub. It can be quite fatal if you choose a disc that is just a little too small, for example, 200 instead of 203 mm. Then it can happen that part of the pad is not worn down, and this burr then at some point prevents the pads from being pressed down to the disc. If you want to change the diameter of the disc, for example, because you have the impression that it is too small and often overheats, this is usually not a problem with the right adapter for your brake caliper. For some years now, you have almost only seen post-mount mounts on forks and frames and post-mount brake calipers in the MTB sector or flat-mount brake calipers in the road bike sector. All you need here is an appropriate adapter that moves your brake caliper 20 mm plus 43 mm or similar away from the fork frame. Changing the 6-bolt disc is super simple. All you need is a Torx T25 tool, preferably a ratchet with a Torx T25 nut. It is best to place the wheel on a wooden block or similar so that the wheel does not rest wobbly on the hub, and then loosen the bolts crosswise, that is, always the opposite sides, so that the tension can be distributed, and simply remove the disc. With Centerlock discs, you have to apply a little more force, which is why I don't lay the wheel on the ground, but stabilize it a little with my own body. If you have internal gearing, you will need a cassette puller like this one. If you have external gearing, you can use a bottom bracket tool like the one used for Holotech 2 bottom brackets. Then check that there is no more dirt on the Centerlock mount or toothing, and if in doubt, give it a quick clean. When refitting the disc, make sure that the front is facing upwards. Normally the writing points outwards, and there is also an arrow painted on the disc indicating the direction in which the disc should rotate on the wheel. If you mount it the wrong way round, the struts here, for example, will not be supported against the direction of rotation, and this is not particularly good for the stability of the disc. Incidentally, it is impossible to mount Centerlock discs the wrong way round. For 6-bolt discs, tighten the bolts again using a torque spanner. This is always the safest way. As a rule, you can tighten them on the brake disc to around 6 nanometers. For Centerlock discs, replace the locking ring and tighten it slightly as far as you can by hand, and then take your torque spanner, set it to 40 nanometers, and tighten the locking ring again, using the appropriate tool depending on the toothing. With Centerlock discs, it is also advisable to use a torque spanner, as 40 nanometers is not easy for everyone to estimate and should be securely tightened. Depending on the tool used, it is quite easy to slip here, but you can stabilize it a little with your thumb. To show you how, I'm not using a torque spanner for a change, but rather an inexpensive model. When refitting the wheel, you may have to press the brake pads back briefly with a tire lever or similar. As a rule, it is advisable to change the brake pads at the same time as the brake discs, as the pads are always braked onto the surface of the brake disc. But it is not absolutely necessary if you still have relatively fresh pads on them, then finish braking them first. They don't have to end up in the bin. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you now know everything you need to know about replacing your brake disc. See you next time.